Our global commons is the shell of a lava droplet orbiting an explosion contained by the vastness of the void. We're dependent on this global commons and responsible for it. And we together will make it a tragedy or a triumph with our actions and our inactions. There's an inherently nihilistic framework in society I'll draw your attention to that it's an implicit idea that you can't change the world on large scales or long time horizons, and that your actions and inactions dissipate out from you like ripples on a pond tending towards stillness. But I propose that we live in an anti-nihilistic universe where the waves we create with our actions and our inactions, they move out from us and become tidal waves as they move down through the decades and the centuries. So you can imagine in your own life even, just conversations even that changed your life so dramatically that you went on to live a different life and then influence other people who led a different life in turn. And actions or inactions of your parents that changed how you parent your children, and then how they go off to live a different life and influence everybody in this kind of harmonic of waves that we're affecting, but that they grow with intensity as they move out from us. A good example is the cutting of the giant redwoods. Just these men with saws who need not have malice or apathy or evil or anything, because they maybe didn't even realize that they could cut down all the trees. But then 100 years later, they can add to the drought of a millennia because the rainforests create the rain as much as they grow where the rain happens. But for me, the best example of this inherently nihilistic framework of society that maybe draws attention to the anti-nihilistic nature of the universe is a young couple walking home at night on the streets of London in 1820 as the street lamps are being lit by the oil from melted whales. The idea that you melt the most sentient creatures ever to exist to light darkened streets is kind of the ultimate image of a nihilistic framework of society, in my opinion. Because beyond like destabilizing the ecosystem and truncating the culture and communication of these creatures with 3-gallon brains having hundreds of simultaneous conversations, nothing really affected the arc of consciousness on Earth the way that removing so many sentient beings simultaneously perhaps did, such that we could come back in 600 million years at the end of the chapter of plants and animals and see a very different place from that one action. So just through this entire inherently nihilistic framework, we can recognize that our actions actually have amplifying impact as they move down through the centuries. So why do I bring up these examples in a presentation about Ukraine? The institutions that created these situations and so many more were beginning to be addressed by the end of the 1800s, such that by the middle of the 1900s, something like 200 aid organizations sprang forth. And these institutions created by organized altruists, they were made entirely to create positive change, to benefit some ecosystem or entities or even individuals. And it's really like the crowning achievement, a triumph of our species in some level, that we were able to use our organizational ability to create these aid organizations that became as large in some cases as countries. And in doing so, they became incredibly necessary, but they were made in the Stone Age of humanitarian aid, environmental aid as well, where because they didn't have example or precedent, they baked in a series of these base level structural weaknesses in aid itself. And then when they grew very large, they brought these weaknesses along with them, and they can't be modified. Some of these largest and most important aid organizations can't be modified because of the inherent momentum. So the ARK project is partially a method, a mechanism for identifying and addressing some of these base layer systematic flaws in aid, to create a series of beneficial projects that can remain stable when they grow very large and very quickly. This is our YouTube channel, the Altruist Relief YouTube channel. Here on it is this 3-minute video that shows our refugee camp we set up outside of Tijuana to feed the residents and the refugees fleeing gang violence in Latin America. This 3-minute video, I pulled a 1-minute clip out of for you, because most of you, maybe some of you, have seen this video. So this will begin to touch a little bit on these issues with humanitarian aid, because if we were to list them all out, all of the problems over the past 70 or 80 years that's developed with humanitarian environmental aid, some of them are difficult even to explain, like should there have been a refugee camp on the outskirts of Rwanda in '94 that allowed the Hutus to return back into the country. But a lot of them, waste, mismanagement, corruption, greed, skimming money off of the edges, unintended deleterious consequences, they fall into a few categories that can be addressed with transparency, efficiency, and sustainability. So this will show a little bit of our efficiency and sustainability and give you an idea of what this project is doing.
Each field tent is spacious enough to be a warehouse, sterile and washable enough to be a medical tent, with high ceilings creating enough natural ventilation to hold a wood-fired industrial kitchen. They're also bright and beautiful enough to be a classroom or a community center. And multiple field tents can be connected together. Our massive yet lightweight and collapsible industrial kitchens, with a completely scalable off-grid water heating, filtration, and sterilization system, is centered around a set of 4 collapsible wood-fired rocket stoves, capable of boiling 100 gallons of water every hour in custom stainless steel soup pots, or sauteing vegetables in 2-foot woks, or frying tortillas on custom 2-foot wide pans. These stoves allow the kitchen to produce a huge volume of food, off-grid, by burning any natural flammable fuel.
The efficiency and sustainability is a really necessary component of aid moving forward, and aid is a really necessary part of the world moving forward as our primary method for repairing, remedying the global commons. So this instant infrastructure that we've designed and developed, we can set up in different capacities according to the situation, but in this particular instance in Ukraine, consists of 1,400 square foot field tents that can be set up as mass shelters or even daycare or storage or community centers, but primarily in this situation, field kitchens. This kitchen, just in itself, can support about 1,000 people, but multiple field kitchens can be connected together so that one can be entirely devoted to creating fresh water, another to cooking food, and another to storage, even another to be a dining facility. Now, they're radically efficient in the sense that we can really quickly transport all of this collapsible, lightweight gear into a remote or devastated location and set it up to provide all of the basic necessities for a large group of people. And we're building all of this gear in Ukraine with available materials. So the money that's going to build this gear is going to our Ukrainian team and Ukrainian manufacturers, and they're spending that money in local businesses. And the product, the fruit of their labor, is this refugee kitchen that feeds people moving westwards. It's an incredibly efficient use of resources and method of providing these basic necessities. It's radically sustainable in the sense that it's made almost entirely out of recycled or renewable or extremely cheap material,
and it can sustain itself in the sense that the heat, the cooking, the water, all of the energy of the system is provided by these wood stoves. So it runs on any available flammable material and doesn't need to rely on a constant influx of fossil fuels and electricity.
So one good example here is these stoves. You can see they're made out of 2/3 of a steel barrel. They're not shiny. They're made to be the simplest structure that is strong and functional, lightweight and collapsible, and still made out of cheap or recycled renewable materials. It's one of the most commonly available steel structures on Earth. So it has a round door, you'll notice, to accept a 12-inch wide cast ceramic cylindrical rocket stove insert, and it's fully collapsible. The rack on the inside of it holds the 120-pound weight of the repurposed stainless steel beer kegs. And you can imagine if the kegs are set up to be pressure cookers on these rocket stove inserts, that it produces food or fresh water with almost the highest possible efficiency of the flammable material. And then it breaks down into 4 or 6 stoves, can be this extremely tiny, compact system that can be moved into a remote location. Transparency really describes so many of the problems in humanitarian aid. If you follow in GuideStar, even the platinum-rated nonprofits, to their website, you will scarcely find a 990 with a line item saying several $1 million in services, several $1 million in goods, to account for a nation's amount of money spent in a year. So I'm going to show you these numbers from breaking down the Tijuana refugee camp and moving it over to get ready for what is now the Guatemala project. But beyond the numbers, just think in between them about the ways that it could prevent waste and mismanagement and corruption and greed and skimming money off of the edges, and how it can make it so that in many different projects, project managers can follow what's going on really closely. This is a 6-minute video. I'll play about 2 minutes of it.
Past year, ARK spent $15,845.66, corresponding to receipts posted by Nicole, myself, Jill, and Chris. These receipts, totaling $3,300, $9,900, $1,300, and $1,400 respectively, came out of our pockets initially, because in the absence of external donations, we pay for everything ourselves. Then Benny put up $1,000 towards the tent cover. Anonymous put $1,000 into bus repair. $60 in cash went to Nicole. Yergi put up $700 for gas. All other PayPals totaled $325, and Nicole put in an additional $500 of her own, and Jill's family an additional $600. Then I paid Chris back for his portion, and this is what the breakdown of total donations came out to at the end. Here's a spreadsheet of all of our receipts for the past year in chronological order with a description of each one. You can find these spreadsheets along with all of our past financial information on our website. But for right now, I just want to draw your attention to how they're organized. They're in chronological order, indicating who posted each receipt and what it was for. In this case, the receipts are separated into 3 categories: for personal expenses, fuel, and gear and materials, indicating the 3 categories that we spent the most money on during this transitionary period between feeding refugees in Tijuana and getting ready for our next project. Now here are all the external donations not provided by people working for ARK. This wonderful anonymous person gave us another $1,000 check to help with the cost of repairing the buses. A random person gave Nicole $60. And Benny gave us a $1,000 check after years of his organization, the Piñón Foundation, receiving large donations for us without charging a fee in order to issue that letter of tax exemption. And this is the $10.85 that we got through PayPal, including the $700 from Matt Yergi that helped us at a critical moment, and not including the $200 that I returned to Sid and Natty. Here's photographs of all the receipts we received this past year in chronological order according to who posted them. Starting with all of the receipts that Nicole posted. Well, here it is. You've reached the part of the video that is multiple minutes of just flashing receipts. The most diligent among you might pause on each one of them to see that the prices and dates correspond precisely to the spreadsheet that I've provided. But in general, I hope that you recognize that we have the most incredible and radical level of transparency of basically any organization in the accountability of where the money is coming from and what it is being spent on. This accountability and transparency is helpful not only for you, the observer and or possibly donor, but also for us, the people who are conducting the projects.
In general, the anonymous donations even have an accountability method. You could donate $1,111 anonymously and know that it is yours. 4 rabbis once gave us 400 $1 bills. You can have your check with the name redacted, as I showed you earlier. You can put 5 $100 bills into an envelope and write a keyword on the front that then gets transmitted into the video. There's envelopes in the back here. You can try it for yourself. This brings us into Ukraine. Stephen Mahoney says, ARK is far and away better set up on day one than any of the other 1,000 organizations I've helped form in my 20 years as a nonprofit attorney. I believe that you will start to see by the end of this presentation that we have thought this down to a really fine level. These 24 people pictured have done something kind of extraordinary, each of them in some capacity. These 2 people, for example, Aloka and Vika, are the project managers in Ukraine. They were born and raised in Ukraine. They've probably never done anything remotely similar to this, but for the past 4 months, they've been receiving all of the money, posting all of the receipts, organizing the crew, translating documents, talking to city officials, getting leases on parks for these tents. It's amidst missiles falling on their home. The guy on the left, Chris, has been my close friend and associate since the beginning of this project, doing disaster relief after hurricanes. He and I have gone to Ukraine twice together, working on this project recently. Kenai is there right now. He made one of the, got the footage for one of the videos that you will see just hours ago. He spent 6 weeks there as missiles fall on the country. This guy on the left and the guy on the right, they're both displaced because of the war. Arjun is our correspondent and videographer. Vasudev is our lead cook. The guy on the left is manufacturing all of our metal equipment. I worked with him tirelessly through the middle of the night for 8 months to translate all of the blueprints into Ukrainian and into metric and work through all the details. The person on the right is Pastor Gregory, who has allowed us to set up our facility on his property. So many people have participated. My daughter on the lower right, she loaned me her dividend so that I could send it to Ukraine. T on the top right, she runs the whole house while I'm gone. Madhusudin on the left, a Krishna man, he holds the whole house together for people staying there. Diana on the left does our calls. Sakshi Gopal is a carpenter. Olena on the top, she's our translator, fearless translators. We go down to Odessa and other places, and Yashuda left Kharkiv during the missile strikes to come and work for the kitchen. These people have contributed a really helpful amount of money recently. You'll notice some of them. And this project started in some large way as I lived in a little log cabin hauling water, raising an infant daughter, and getting firewood from the top of that hillside you see in the background, going to the Kachemak Bay campus. And you might wonder what degree I got at the Kachemak Bay campus. It is called every class that these 5 people teach. And I'm the only person that received that degree, I think. I stayed there for 4 years in order to take every class that they taught. Beth will forgive me because my textual renderings are more coherent, perhaps, than my auditory emission. Sarah will notice how much algebra and trigonometry goes into 12-sided pyramids. Kathy prompted me to build the first models of refugee camps in 2009 and then gave me firsthand experience of working in aid all over the world. Ed perhaps notices that I worked in the ARK of global consciousness and the removal of trees into a presentation about Ukraine. And Mike perhaps will notice that I made an original web series on geopolitics that is a curated content, is a compilation of clips from the most reliable news programs around the world on a single topic, selected from dozens of sources for their clarity, accuracy, and perspective. 22 countries. I select these news programs to show the context that we're operating in. I've gone through several thousand of these videos this year. About this mess. So, you know, I will just, rather than belabor this map, you know, we're Mediterranean, the Black Sea, Crimea, Ukraine, Kiev. Just pick any of those lights on the map, and I'll move on rhetorically, but ask yourself, to what degree are those lights lit by the gas, oil, grain, or fertilizer from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus? Like all the way down to Cairo, those lights are lit by the grain from Ukraine. Over to Portugal and Spain, those lights are lit by the fertilizer that comes out of the Haber-Bosch process in Germany from the gas out of Russia. The potassium, almost entirely in most of the world, comes out of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. It's an interrelationship I don't think they fully recognized. This is my personal YouTube channel, Lucid Lorax. I post videos. If I go to work in a Syrian refugee camp or I take a hot air balloon over the pyramids, it ends up in this YouTube channel. This is a 25-minute video about my time in Ukraine. I went there in early April initially to look into moving the gear that we have in the United States over to Ukraine to set it up as a refugee camp, knowing that this was going to take out the gas and go into the winter, and realized kind of quickly that we would need to establish the manufacturing to build these kitchens from scratch in the country. I compiled a 3-minute clip out of here for you. I traveled through time from Alaska to Ukraine to try to understand what was happening, to set up the manufacturing for our wood-fired industrial kitchens, to bring you a little glimpse of the heart of Ukraine, and to provide some tangible way for us to help our human family on the other side of this little world.
There's been a missile attack today on the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, which until now has largely escaped unscathed since the Russian invasion began.
So I showed up in Lviv in the middle of the night, after curfew, under martial law, on the day of the missile strikes. I did not know until I arrived at this cabin in the Carpathians that it was a sanctuary for a dozen people who had fled the war in other parts of Ukraine.
Ні на що це зовсім не схоже. Я немов маленька дитина, що без тебе жити не може.
Сообщение, ну, например, быть подписанным на каналы чьи-то, да, и чтобы Гренландия, серьезно, ну, на обычной карте открой в Гугле, там будет Гренландия такого же размера, как Африка, вот просто один.
Is there a point at which you'd consider leaving Ukraine entirely?
А были ли случаи, когда ты думала валить с Украины навсегда?
Ни разу.
Not
Даже-
any single time.
Даже при наличии, опять же, американского гражданства.
She think about it as her responsibility. She feels that if she can help one person at least, it's already a big deal. And if she can help 10 people, so it's definitely a reason to stay here.
Wow. I have to relay to you what the lives of people are like in the situations that become two-dimensional on the news or in statistics, and why it's necessary, why it's a worthwhile use of time to participate, to help, to alleviate, to create some relief in situations that we might otherwise feel powerless to engage with.
This video, it's very short. It's only a minute. It's my friend on the left there is Chris. We went in back in June after this first trip in kind of just meeting people in April and getting the initial connections going. We went back in June to figure out all of the details with the manufacturing and then to scout different places in the country that we could set these kitchens up. This building here, the church on the right, the church that has let us set up on their property, this building here next to it has 100 refugees, mostly women and children who fled from other places farther east, a playground on the left there that we had to decommission for a short time. And my esteemed colleague Chris here with our 4-foot tent stakes, making the frame of this tent out of recycled drilling equipment and setting it up with winches because we'd already demonstrated our capacity to set the thing up with a car or a truck. We wanted to set them up with winches and come-alongs to demonstrate the method and make an instructional video so that many of these could be set up simultaneously all around the country in different capacities. It took 2 of us theoretically a day to put them up. Once we took the cable off the playground, the children flooded back into the playground and packed up for us.
Dude, nice job.
We carried the poles into position. Once the tripod is up in the air, you put this ladder on the top and run it from a winch on the bottom, just raising the legs into place. It's gonna last as long as that church in this point. This is Aloka on the right, who's been translating and just incredible at running this aspect of the project. We're in the cover fabrication facility so that I can lay out the dimensions of putting it together. Kenai here is raising it into position. He flew to Ukraine just as Chris and I were leaving so that he could take over buttoning down the cover and building the floor. Here you see it as tight as a drum in the lot up front of this church. And then here's Kenai building the floor on the inside. We made them out of pallets in this case because there's no drainage on this site and we needed to be able to create this natural drainage. There's Vasudev making the floor. You can see once the floor goes in, each of these tents becomes a production facility to build additional kitchens and clinics. It becomes a 1,400 square foot workstation to build more of these facilities at a greater economy of scale.
Just working, finishing the floor inside of the tent, and then I heard the first explosion. I came out, I heard the second explosion, then I looked behind the tent and I saw the big pile of smoke. And right in this moment, while I started to record the video, shot the video, there came the third explosion.
You could feel the shock wave come through. And you could see it in the tent as it went through. You could feel it. You could see it like wave.
Ukrainian Air Force says about 100 Russian missiles have been fired at cities across Ukraine, hitting Kyiv, Kharkiv, Lviv, as well as others. Officials say the country is bracing for more attacks.
This has been perhaps the worst, or the second worst, salvo and attempt to break the back of the power generating, the energy infrastructure of this country, which as winter is now setting in, of course, affects not just the power supply, but the water supply and, of course, ultimately heating.
And so they destroyed the electric station, and now the whole city is blackout. There is no light at all.
This video I made about 3 hours ago. It was sent to me by Kenai, who's on the top of the tent right there. He worked late into the middle of the night because it's 11 hours in the future over there, and sent me the footage such that I could compile this video for your viewing pleasure, so no one short of myself has seen this yet.
Fresh firewood on the deck. Vasudev, the lead cook, raises the stack into place for the stoves that he will soon be running. The 7-meter-high stove stack pierces through the top of the conical tent that provides enough natural ventilation to hold a wood-fired industrial kitchen. And the whole process is captured by Arjun, the ARK correspondent and lead videographer, who is also working to construct the kitchen and will soon be one of the cooks inside of it. Working on the outskirts of a darkened city amidst a nationwide blackout, Kenai hooks up the last of the stoves late into the night. Each stove fitted with a 15-gallon stainless steel beer keg cut into a soup pot can hold about 12.5 gallons. Such that all 6 stoves together make 75 gallons of food nearly every hour. At about 8 meals per gallon, if these stoves were to run only 3 hours per day, they would cook about 50,000 meals per month. But if this 1,400 square foot cooking tent was the center of a 4-tent kitchen compound, with the adequate supply chain, crew, gear, and funding, it could make more than 6,000 meals per day.
So again, this web series, I can't really get in too much into the geopolitics around it. This compiles thousands of videos into 5, 10, 15-minute chunks that describe a topic as seen from 20 or 30 different countries around the world. So you kind of balance out the biases.
It's almost December. Winter is here for those who are already fighting a war, battling a crippling food shortage and living amid outages. This winter is going to be a tough one.
The World Health Organization says Russia has carried out the biggest attack on healthcare on European soil since World War II. And it's left millions of Ukrainians facing a life-threatening situation this winter.
Several cities are without electricity, water and heating. Among the worst affected are Kyiv, Lviv, Mykolaiv and Kharkiv. The situation is a desperate one for millions of Ukrainians. Temperatures are plummeting and winter has only just begun. Hospitals across the country, such as this one in Kherson, are dependent on torches for light.
Here in the capital, the city's mayor says at least 80% of residents have been left without power and water, and they are not alone. Cities right across Ukraine are dealing with blackouts and problems with water supplies.
Doctors can be seen performing a heart surgery despite the blackout. This happened at the Heart Institute of Kiev. The surgeons were performing a heart operation on a child when they ran out of power. But they did not stop their work and they finished the surgery successfully.
This one is from my birthday, January 27th of 22. Before the war struck, you get an idea of Ukraine. This is Thanksgiving. The extent of the strikes on the energy infrastructure can't be overstated. It's the reason that I sent myself there in April. It's the reason that we decided to set up manufacturing to make an increasing number of these kitchens rather than just set up one, anticipating that this is going to be a difficult conflict. I'll leave it here for a second just to touch briefly on a couple of things about the geopolitical situation. This is Ukraine. Lviv is where the manufacturing center for the kitchens are. This is the capital in Kiev. This is Odessa, down on the primary port, exporting the Crimean Peninsula, the Sea of Azov, and this is that bottom 15% that's been annexed by Russia, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk Oblast. This, one of the most interesting things to note about the current state of the Russian Empire is that it's just an unimaginably large place with a huge amount of coastline, and they can't access the ocean almost anywhere in the country. Russia doesn't even want to cross Siberia. They can only get to the Atlantic through a NATO lake, and only in the summertime. So Crimea is their key to having a warm water port. That little light on the bottom, Sevastopol, the primary port of Crimea, that's where Putin's father is from. Putin is an incredibly nostalgic person. He's an avid historian who loves dates and anniversaries and locations and the buildings associated with the formation of the Russian Empire. So Crimea is incredibly important. It is the most important addition to the Russian Empire since the fall of the Soviet bloc, but it only exists because of a canal coming down from mainland Ukraine and a tiny little delicate bridge coming over from the mainland Russia. And if you strike that bridge and cut off the canal, this most important part of Russia in some ways, the only really substantial warm water port, becomes useless. They need this land corridor, this 15% of Ukraine, in order to get to Crimea, to maintain the canal, to maintain supply routes into that strategic warm water port. And existentially, Russia is kind of collapsing demographically, and they're at this kind of apex of their development versus other countries, and Europe is as weak as it will ever be in cutting off the gas. That 40% of Europe's gas comes from Russia. The fertilizer I can barely get into. So they absolutely existentially believed that it was necessary at all costs to make a land corridor to Crimea. They would love a negotiated settlement this month. I listened to the news out of 24 different countries. Nobody mentions that this month is the 100th anniversary of the formation of the Soviet Union. And he is just such an incredibly nostalgic person. He wants to have a conquest, a victory, something to show for that 100th anniversary. Xi Jinping is very much also, and this is the 70th anniversary, very close to the 70th anniversary of the formation of the 5-year plan that they got from the Soviet Union. So they are both incredibly interested in the particular acquisitions that will create this bipolar world order with Russia and China dominating one of these poles. Think back on 15 years of Putin and Merkel hanging out and getting ice cream, and him bringing her flowers, and he speaks German and she speaks Russian, and they would go to the beach together, and he was conning her the entire time to set up Europe on gas so that he could pull the plug and just deal a nearly catastrophic blow to Europe all in one fell swoop. It was just, he's been planning this since 89, 90, 91. They set up their economy, their military, everything to regain the most strategic parts of the former Soviet bloc, of which Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk is that place. I hate to touch on the fertilizer because I won't do it justice, but I'll just say almost all the fertilizer in the world comes from Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and China. China demonstrated that this war was going to happen a year and a half ago when they stockpiled more grain than had ever been stockpiled in world history. And then in September of a year ago, when they made phosphorus exports illegal. They're the primary exporter of phosphorus in the world. All crops require primarily nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen, in Europe at least, is a gas-intensive process that they require the gas from Russia in order to make nitrogen in Europe. They require the potassium from Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. It's the primary producer of those three places of potassium. And phosphorus, we're almost out of phosphorus in the entire world. There's nothing so irreplaceable besides elephants and whales as phosphorus. It's an element. It will be hundreds of years before we can get it from the moon. When we run out of phosphorus, there's just no massive agriculture left after that. 2/3 of the phosphorus that remains is in Morocco. There will be a war in Morocco in the next 20 years. But until then, unless Russia and China kind of gain some stability and begin exporting equally, there will be a bigger problem from most of the fertilizer controlled by those two nations than by the grain out of Ukraine. And Guatemala. We also have 20,000 pounds of custom gear on 2 buses heading to Guatemala to set up a series of clinics and kitchens, and a support vehicle are going down to Guatemala January or February to set up a series of clinics so that we can run refugee kitchens on one side of the world and clinics on the other and demonstrate kind of our capacity to undertake these things. Nicole Lorang will be running that project primarily. She's overqualified for the task, having traveled widely in Latin America. She has a Master of Nursing and Midwifery. She's a backcountry medic. She's traveled all over the world. She will be, many of you remember Robin George, a wonderful person who now has a Master of Public Health and has also traveled widely in Latin America and working with indigenous and tribal health. She will be participating, consulting on the advisory board, which I welcome. If anyone would like to participate in this kind of project, I welcome you. It's much of the reason I am here. You can imagine the ubiquity of these kinds of projects. Providing food, water, shelter, sanitation, and medical is the foundation of every other aid project. If you want to plant 1 million trees in the desert, you better be able to provide for the basic necessities of thousands of people. If you want to build a school, you have to have food, water, shelter, sanitation, and medical for a large group of volunteers. And so now I'll just quickly go through some of the numbers. I touched on some of them before. But a meal is an idea because a child eats a very small amount and a large man eats a very large amount. On average, there's about 8 meals in a gallon of food. So we can make, as I said on that video, we can make 6,000 meals in 10 hours if we had one of those 4 tent compounds, assuming that we have a continuous supply chain, perhaps 20 skilled workers, enough money, and so forth. We can make 6,000 meals a day per kitchen, but how many meals are we likely to make in Ukraine this winter? 1,800 meals a day assumes that we only run those stoves for 3 hours a day. Distribution is very difficult, but there's a large number of people that are right near to that kitchen, and we're building another one on the north side of Lviv. We're leasing a park to build one of these compounds. Realistically, we can make at least one more kitchen. If nobody else likes this project, if nobody else donates to it or participates in any way, we can probably make 250,000 meals by spring. Each kitchen, the frame was 3,000, the cover is 2,000, the floor is 1,000. The stove system with the pots is 3,000. It's $1,000 for all the spoons and utensils. So the full kitchen that you saw with the stove system and the cover and the floor is $10,000. The 4-tent system is, with an economy of scale, is $25,000 to make one of those. That means that each one of those kitchens factored into the cost of a meal is only 3 cents on each meal after 10 months. It's a negligible amount of money for each meal. So the expenses are where the money really comes from. $25 a day per person. I'm personally out of the savings that I used to have paying these refugees and residents of Ukraine $25 a day to build this kitchen. So all of the money is going into Ukraine. $3,000 for 6 people working 20 days a month, $100 a day in food supplies and vehicle costs to distribute some of this food means that it's about 14 cents a meal. What if it's twice as expensive for the expenses? If all of the expenses are twice as much, the cost per meal goes from 14 cents to 20 cents per meal, which means that for $1 you can feed about 2 or 3 people in this particular context, assuming complications, assuming we have lots of issues. How you can help? You can help instantly by voting for this organization before. Like most democracies, you can vote as many times as you like if you have a sufficient amount of money. And there's envelopes in the back there. You could write, like we said, you could write a code word on it if you'd like to remain anonymous. Or you can go to our website here. This first button shows you this PayPal to donate less than $500. The second button takes you to this information about how to put money directly into our account and receive a letter of tax exemption. But this man, Benny Goldenhart, who had set up the method for us to receive money before we had been incorporated, he will put up $5,000 for anyone who donates $5,000 on their own. He wants to prompt someone else to be interested in this project on a level that will make half of a kitchen so that you and this man together can make one more kitchen. But primarily, the reason I'm here is to entice you in some way to participate in this organization, because 90% of the work of putting this organization together happens from our homes, in our libraries, on our phones, and computers, doing research and writing grants. And perhaps you speak Spanish and have traveled in Latin America. Perhaps you have a degree or own a business or do scholarships or grants or web design. Or we are going to just brainstorm planning and research. Perhaps you are good at logistical planning and you'd like to meet for an evening a month to brainstorm how to move forward. I hope I've laid the case for why this project is so unique, for why Steve Mahoney says that it's better set up on day one than the other 1,000 organizations he's seen in his lifetime. I hope that I've laid the case for why you would participate in repairing or remedying some aspects of our global commons. Thank you. Yes?
So this gives a good indication of building the capacity, the kitchens. So where does the staff, where does the money for the food, where does the ingredients for the food come from?
It's all, I mean, the food can come from Poland in large degree, but all of the materials for the kitchen and the people working on it are the refugees and residents of Ukraine affected by this event. So it's very sustainable in that sense. There is food coming in from Poland, and there's food coming in from the port of Constanta in Romania into Odessa. So once we set up in Odessa, we have already established a supply chain for food from Constanta.
Do you buy it?
I would buy it. It can be donated to some degree. There's other organizations, the largest organizations left, and so there's a lot of, for the most part, there's a lot of food left over. And as I was saying, there's 75 million tons of grain. It's kind of a distribution and a processing problem, where if we have this economy of scale capacity to receive bulk food that is otherwise hard to distribute in some way. So there's organizations trying to give out food, but the hot meals makes it possible in a city where people are living in these apartment buildings that no longer have light or cooking capacity or gas stoves. So So being able to cook these hot meals in these urban areas is necessary. But that food is available through Poland, through Romania, and in Ukraine. Yeah.
I get where the rest of the stuff goes. Where does the skin come from? You know, the outside.
Yeah, it's a vinyl coated polyester in this case. It's a very common material. It's the cheapest possible material that's UV resistant and blizzard proof and things, and we can make those ourselves. You saw the process of making that cover in that facility. We can make those ourselves now that we have a 1,400 square foot facility in Ukraine, and also in Guatemala. We have these set up on the buses, ready to drive down. It's nearly free to do this Guatemala project if we just drive the buses down. So once we set up the first ones, we have a production facility to make more. We should be making food in the next week or so. There's been some complications since that last wave of missile strikes, but we have basically everything we need to make food now. And we don't have to distribute it because there's easily 1,000 people in the near vicinity to that first church that can come to the property. And we're getting ready to lease a property on the north side of Lviv to build a larger compound. So it would be the same way. We wouldn't have to distribute. If we do distribute food, we can serve kind of exponentially more than we would in one place. Yeah, Ed?
Can you explain your thinking of opening up a second front in Guatemala? To me, it just sounds like you're spreading yourself way too thin.
In the process of going to bring all of the gear that we have in North America to Reynosa, we built all new tents and stoves and gear and repaired the buses, and they're in perfect condition, and they're just sitting in New Mexico right now. And it'll only be a couple $1,000s to get them down to Guatemala. And I'm focusing mostly on my energy on these ethereal aspects and on the Ukraine project. But Nicole and Robin and so many other people on our team that are in healthcare and have traveled widely in Latin America can use this gear, and it doesn't detract at all from my capacity to continue going to Ukraine. And I mostly have it self-sufficient set up in Ukraine. These 24 people that you see there are, for the most part, keeping the operation running themselves. And I troubleshoot in the middle of the night. I'm nocturnal whenever possible, so I can talk on the phone. But the Guatemala project doesn't at all interfere, and quite to the contrary, we have all of this gear that might as well be doing something. So once we move it down there, I could spend a week setting up the tents, and then these incredibly skilled women who aren't able to go to Ukraine and who speak good Spanish and have lots of experience in medical care will be able to run these clinics, and it won't at all detract, neither project will detract from the other.